I'm Tammy Dennett, ex-Target workplace bully turned communication coach. But it wasn't that long ago when I lacked the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to ditch the drama, confidently handle difficult conversations, and create better relationships. Fast forward past many failed attempts and lessons learned, and you will see the business that I have today. One that is helping others just like you to find the confidence and peace knowing you can change your circumstances one conversation at a time. I created the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit to give you access to industry leaders who are sharing simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can do the same. If you are an employee, supervisor, or an employer and you are looking to access the top strategies to successfully dissolve conflict without damaging your relationships, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Today, I want to introduce you to Debra Falzoi. She believes that all employees deserve dignity in the workplace and respect for well-being. She helps employees define themselves according to their own values and teaches employers how to get results by focusing on employee power. She has helped hundreds of targeted employees understand their abuse situations, discover their self-worth, and learn how to move on from their toxic work cultures. Deb's been quoted in numerous media outlets, including Redbook, Forbes, Munster, and so many more. And she serves on the board of the National Workplace Bully Coalition and hosts the Screw the Hierarchy podcast. Welcome, Debra.
Thanks so much for having me, Tammy.
I'm delighted to have you. Now, today, what we're going to be talking about is what to stop doing, what to start doing in order to stand in your power. But before we get into those pieces, why don't we just share with our listeners how you came into being an advocate in workplace bullying?
Yeah, so I've been working on this issue for a long time. I was bullied back in 2007 at a university in Boston. It was a situation that, in hindsight, was pretty textbook where, things were great for the first few months. I was getting compliments on my work. And then things started to go south. So this woman who wasn't my boss, but she was above me, and I reported to her on a couple of projects, started removing responsibilities from me. Um, she tried passing them off to a graduate student and tried framing it as help, but it really was taking away my power to see, what I wanted to pass off in my job, and what would be helpful for me. And then it just escalated from there. There was a committee formed to oversee my work, and most of the people on the committee had no, or at least a component of my work. And most of the people on the committee had no background in that work. So there was this slow chipping away at taking away my power and my
Mhm.
control. And it escalated. I, had said things to her, it didn't go anywhere. So I reported things to HR, to the head dean at the school, and I got really blown off by both of them. And then as a result of that, I got retaliated against by the bully. She ended up giving me a written warning for not following a procedure that didn't even exist.
Mm.
So luckily, in my situation, I was able to find other work before it got any worse. But during that whole situation, I was having sleepless nights. I was stressed out going into work every day, wondering if that would be my last day. I was kind of growing with my career, and the last thing I needed was somebody to sabotage it when I was, doing what I thought was great work and what other professors were telling me, was great. So it became pretty clear at some point that this was sabotage, and that the actual work culture wasn't going to be on my side. It was a toxic culture. Management was just going to try to brush it under the rug and hope that it would go away and that I would go away.
Mhm.
So this was back in 2007, and I had gotten involved at that point in legislation in Boston. Um, you know, figured that this should be legal, that someone shouldn't have the power to just rob somebody of their career, things that they've built through experience and education. And if you're in a protected class, and you can prove that you're in a protected class and it's severe, you have protections, but otherwise you don't. Even if you believe that it could be because of, you're a woman, or because of your race, or any number of protected classes. There's really not a lot of protection. It's not it hasn't really, I could get into that whole aspect of it, but it's really an issue that hasn't really disrupted much in terms of the social hierarchies at work, and which, members of which demographics are able to have the power.
Mhm.
So in working in that, I really went through this personal transformation of, exploring my childhood, and realizing, who I was handing my power over to, um, and really um, try to understand what my values were, and what situations I was in where there was this complete misalignment of values.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was seeing in my work on legislation this happening with so many other targets of workplace abuse, where they'd have these very textbook situations, and they had no idea, because it's so overwhelming, and you get this tunnel vision of how to navigate it, or even how to heal from it once you're out of the situation, and you think that that's it and it's over with, and then you get into another situation, or you just have trouble trusting people, or any host of emotions that can come up as a result of having had that traumatic experience. So
Mhm.
it led me to, not just working on advocating for other targets of workplace abuse and giving them a voice that they've been robbed of in their work situations, but also helping targets navigate what they're going through, help them heal from it, and also help managers, help their employees stand in their power, have control over their jobs, and get the support that they need.
Mhm. That is, I had goosebumps many times as you were sharing that. We have a similar background, and as you were sharing your story, very similar as to what I had gone through as well. Partly why I had the goosebumps. But first, I just want to say sorry that you even had to go through that, because I know when I went through it, people didn't understand it. Then I didn't understand it. And I think you brought up a really good point, is that when you're in it, like for me, I just thought I had a bad boss. I've said that a few times throughout this summit. And I don't know if you had felt the same way initially, that they just didn't know how to treat you. And then it kind of all of a sudden over time, a bully culture revealed itself to you. Was that your experience?
Yeah, yep. There was definitely a toxic culture.
Yeah, and that was my experience as well. And I think what happens with that, and maybe you can add to this, is when people are in it, they don't see that their behaviors are toxic, and they don't see how they're contributing to it until people like us come in and say, "Hey, this isn't okay, and this is why." And it is a difficult place to move through, and to be that voice and journey through it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I call it normal reactions to an abnormal situation are, a lot of it's like the grief, the grief
Mm-hmm.
stages of anger, and, feeling betrayed is a big one for people who've been targeted. There's the depression piece of it. There's all sorts of emotions that people have as a result of that, and then they can end up becoming, bullies themselves, and contributing to a toxic culture. So it's good to remind people, that, you know, abuse is abuse, and they're not the problem. And that's kind of a key realization for targets to make, to sort of detach themselves from the bullying that's happening, or the overall toxic culture. And that even extends onto our greater culture, where there is no law to protect us from this. Um, so, that can be a common thing to join in, instead of detaching from
Mm-hmm.
here, and realize, and sticking to your own values.
Yeah. Now I know you're in the States, you had mentioned, and I know in Canada there is quite a movement. They've just in the last couple of years, I think it was 2016, maybe it was 2018, where they actually introduced bullying into our Occupational Health and Safety Act. And so now within our organizations, they have a responsibility to educate about it, to actually take complaints and do an investigation. But also the employees have a responsibility to participate and communicate in respectful ways, and to speak up if they see things. So there are things moving in our country, and I know there's things moving in your country, because I see a lot of your stuff come through about the law.
Yeah.
And we could probably spend hours talking about that, but we want to really focus on the value piece here. And Because you had mentioned there was a disconnection between values. So let's talk a little bit about what values are and why that became an important piece in your journey.
So, one of the keys that I realized over time, for myself and just my research that happened as a result of this, is that if you have a value misalignment with your employer, then it's kind of the overarching problem. So if you see corruption or a toxic work environment or illegal things happening, it's very easy to internalize those things, especially, a lot of this relates to how much shame we experienced as a child and how we reacted to that shame. um, but the key is to make sure that you are in a work environment where your values do align with the employer, especially your boss, because that relationship is so key to
Hmm.
your mental health at work. So, um, one of the things that targets are very inclined to do, like I said, is to really internalize, and question themselves. And a lot of us are raised to seek approval from authority, and so when a boss is threatened by us, that can be counterproductive, because then they'll just become more threatened by us the more we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. So, if we get really focused, and this is not a simple assignment, it can really take a long time and is part of the healing process. But if we really focus on what our values are, and understand that we have the power to shape our lives around those values, and separate ourselves from people in situations who don't align with our values, instead of festering in the anger of it, even though those are natural responses. We can really get stuck in some of those emotions. So the sooner we can get to a place of what's important to us, what do we value, and how can we set up our lives around that, um, the more resilient we can be, and we can move on from these situations that aren't serving us.
Yeah, and I imagine there's probably some competition for values that exists in these situations as well. For example, I value having food in my belly and my bills paid and being responsible with those things that I owe to people. But I also value being treated with respect, and so I've got this internal, I don't know what the word is, like argument between which value is going to supersede here. And so, how did you navigate that when you were going through it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the common things is that conflict of, do I decide between my health or a paycheck? And then if I pick my health, I'm going to have this whole host of other stressors if I
Hmm.
leave. So I think it's really important to know that to know what your values are, but to not necessarily take immediate action based on them. So, to be firm that your values are different or better than your employers, and to know that this isn't serving me, I'm going to find a situation that does, and to take the time to create that safety net, so that you're not walking into a toxic, maybe in another toxic situation, or a situation where you're unable to provide for your basic needs. So I think you can do both. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, to have to stay in a toxic situation when you know that
Hmm.
there's something better out there for you. But I think it's easier when you get to that mindset that these are my values, and this situation is no longer serving me. So this is what I do want to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that shift. It's not only just acknowledging that I've got some tension between these two, but it's like, which one do I want to prioritize and how do I get there? Right. So maybe I need to stay in this job for the next 6 months while I take some training or update my skills, or look at places where I can move to that would be a little bit more suitable for me, whatever that external goal looks like. It sounds like once you've tapped into that value set, the rest of it becomes a bit more manageable because you know now where you're heading, and then you can deal with these things that come up in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah, and not to minimize like the all of the feelings to kind
Yeah.
of go along with that, but yeah, that's exactly it. And the next step doesn't have to be, the first step to your dream job, or it can just be a healthier situation. It could be temping if that's feasible. It could be, being a gig employee for a while, like whatever will work for you, and getting to
Mhm.
know your needs can help you really pull your power back.
Well, and I think sometimes if someone can't leave the workplace and potentially there's options to transfer to another department, there's even some anxiety around that because I like my coworkers. I just don't like maybe my boss or this one particular coworker, but I want to stay with the other people that I know. And so then they have anxiety about making this one step to just get out from underneath this current situation, give themselves that reprieve and try something new in the same organization.
Yeah, there's definitely losses that come with kind of any choice that's made. There's generally no perfect choice. I mean, sometimes people luck out and get a better job, and
Mhm.
but most often it's, the case where people are taking less pay, or yeah, leaving a situation where they do like things. Or I hear all the time people say, "But I love my job."
Mhm.
And you know, part of any job is the relationships that you have with people. So if those are toxic, you might like the work that you do, but there are usually other opportunities to do that kind of work elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly said that too when I was going through my journey as well.
Yeah,
Love the job, hate the people.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So what is it that our listeners should stop doing and start doing so they can start to get into their power?
So the stop would be compromising your values for those people in power, and to stop. And this is a tough one. Like I said, this might take some really digging into childhood, you know,
Mhm.
situations. But stop the seeking approval, and taking on others' issues, and just really focusing on your own needs. So stop doing those two things, and then start noticing, what's triggering you, or what makes you feel a certain way, and start, setting boundaries, or start asserting your needs. And then eventually you want to start figuring out, what your purpose is, maybe looking back on your life at some key situations that have happened, and for good or for bad, and realize how those things have shaped you, and what, skills you've drawn from them, or passions you've drawn from them. And really start, tackling your limiting beliefs. And then lastly, start taking steps to get there. So Liz Ryan, who's a career coach, wrote this amazing book called Reinvention Roadmap, where she actually guides people through that process. I love following her on social media, but she calls it putting putting your canoe in the water, of like taking that first step to like I said before, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you can get closer to where you want to be, and sort of look at your life with altitude, and sort of see this big picture,